Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time of study, and thank you for your word. And Lord, this is a tough chapter, but it's words for us today too. And you want us to study the whole word. Lord, we pray that we would gain insight and just learn how to be closer to you. And we pray this all in your holy name. Amen. Okay, so this is a tough chapter in our society, but these are God's words. They're not someone's opinions, theories, feelings. None of that stuff changes this. This is God's words. And while this is directed at the Israelites, it's for us too. We're going to run into some things that are clearly not directed to us anymore. Things have changed. But this chapter still applies. So there's an interesting pattern to this chapter. Verses 1 through 23, God is telling people what not to do. And then the rest of the chapter, he tells them why. Normally we haven't run into the whys. It's just been, don't do this. When I worked for Riverside County, for most of the time I was there, I interpreted regulations from the state and rewrote them, because you can imagine there was a lot of gobbledygook. Rewrote them so that our staff could understand what it was talking about. And sometimes we had to add more to it, but we always wrote from a positive view. Here is what you do. We were never to write all the things not to do. It was only write what to do, because then if you knew what to do, you could figure out what not to do. But our staff, they would do the things they weren't supposed to do, and they would say, but you didn't tell us not to do that. Well, God is writing from the negative view, saying don't do that, because he knows our nature. We're going to go to those things. You didn't tell us not to do that. But even though he tells us not to do some of this stuff, our society still does it. Okay, so let's look at verses 1 through 5.
We're in chapter 17, correct?
18. Leviticus 18.
We're in 18?
Is that,
okay.
Yeah. Now, don't make me go back that one.
No.
That's awesome.
This is bad now. Okay, verses 1 through 5, Olga.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God, according to the doings of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, you shall not do, and according to the doings of the land of the Canaan, where I am bringing you, you shall not do, nor shall you walk in their ordinances. You shall observe my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man does, he shall live by them. I am the Lord.
Do you see a phrase repeated a few times in there?
Yeah.
No.
You shall.
Well,
I am the Lord.
I am the Lord,
I am the Lord.
or I am the Lord your God. And what did we learn about if something is repeated?
Pay attention.
Pay attention. God's saying, I'm God. 3 times he said, I'm God. I have the authority to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
So before he gives any commands, he establishes a foundation. He's God. We are not. As his people, we're to do what he wants us to do, not what the world wants us to do. For them, the emphasis is don't do like the Canaanites do. Don't do like the Egyptians did. You came out of Egypt, you're going to Canaan, you're kind of in the middle here. Don't look in your past, don't look in the future. You do what I want you to do. Verse 5 gives a reason why we're to do all this. God doesn't want to take away all our fun, unlike what the world thinks. He wants us to do this so we have a better life. This is for our good. 18 times in this chapter, we're going to see God say, don't be like the people around you. I want you to be different. It's so hard to escape what goes on around us. Wouldn't it be great to live in a society where everybody was Christian and acted like it? The world didn't have an impact on us, but that's not God's plan. He wants us to live in the world. He wants us to be the light in the world. How have the world's standards changed since you were young?
Oh. Day and night.
Is it better? Oh, even the young, it's not better. Our standards are...
Only technology kind of...
Technology definitely
kind
is
of
getting
But
better.
I think technology is what brought it on. It's what brought on this.
It's easier for things
This
to
fallen world.
spread.
Yeah.
Our society has gone the way of, if it feels right, it's got to be good. And that is not right. We have a twisted sense of right and wrong in our society. And there's been so much damage, and throughout history, we can see the world's standards have done damage, and it continues to do damage. It will keep doing damage. This chapter is going to focus on sexual sin, which is so fun to talk about. And God is not condemning sex under the right circumstances within a marriage relationship. But our current society takes that away, and it causes so much confusion. And again, God's standard isn't meant to hurt anybody or reject anybody. It's for the good of society and for individuals. If we live by God's rules, we live a better life. Also note that this is a standard. This isn't, it's not the way to salvation. Following all these rules doesn't bring you to salvation. We see how many rules there are, and that didn't save any Hebrew. But a life of obedience is a better life. We obey because we are saved. We don't obey and then get saved. It's the other way around. And as a note, sexual sin is like any other sin. Sin is sin. And because we are Christians, we have a message of hope for anyone in any kind of sin. It's not a message of condemnation. Unfortunately, the world sees us as Christians as condemning everyone. And that's not what God wants us to do. He wants us to, again, be a light and show the world the right way, but not turn to hate for people that are, especially in sexual sin. Hi, Betty.
Oh, sorry I'm late.
That's okay. Okay, verses 6 through 9.
None of you shall approach any one of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's daughter. whether brought up in the family or in another home.
Okay, so the first part of this chapter is going to focus on close relatives, on incest. So, who's included?
Parents and siblings.
Pretty much parents and siblings, including step and half. So what about Abraham and Sarah? They would have been included in this list.
But weren't they married before they saw each other? This is non-married
Yeah,
stuff.
and this was at a time where there were a lot less choices around. At this point, there's no longer a need. You don't need to marry a close relative because there's so many people
A
around.
million people.
Yeah, it became a forbidden relationship. We see the term uncover the nakedness used 17 times in this chapter. It's a polite way of saying having sex.
18.
It doesn't mean just voyeurism. It means having relations of some kind, and it could include pornography, because you're having a fantasy relationship with someone at that point. So, relations basically covered here: parents and children, parents and stepchildren, siblings by birth or marriage, even if they're consenting adults. No. So there's both moral and genetic reasons for this inbreeding. With inbreeding, there's a 30% chance of retardation or some other serious defect in those relationships, and God doesn't want that happening. The nakedness of a person belongs to their spouse and to their spouse only. You notice it says if you uncover a wife's nakedness, you uncover the husband's nakedness. That's because they are one flesh, they belong together. Okay. Betty, we'll come back to you because you're still getting set up.
I had to pass because I didn't bring my glasses.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, then we're going to verses 10 through 18. This time it's not you, Mia, it's a big chunk.
You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter or of your daughter's daughter, for their nakedness is your own nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, brought up in your father's family, since she is your sister. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother, that is, you shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter, and you shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are relatives. It is depravity. And you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to her sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is still alive.
Okay, so these are all from the male standpoint. It would go vice versa too, but the ones that are covered here are your sister, your niece, your granddaughter, your stepsister, your aunt, your daughter-in-law, your sister-in-law, your stepdaughter, your granddaughter, lots of women. Notice who isn't covered. First cousins. First cousins aren't in this list. So I thought, let's see what the laws are now. Did you know in California it's legal to marry your first cousin?
No, I didn't know that.
It is.
Didn't, what's his name, the singer,
Yeah.
Oh, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yes.
Oh,
he
yeah.
married his first cousin.
Well, he's from the South. You expect that. California.
I mean, California is pretty crazy these days. You can pretty much do anything.
Oh no, there's so many jokes that we teased about Georgia and Alabama. So you're good.
Yeah. So what's the law in Utah? You cannot marry your cousin unless one of them is over childbearing age or over 55. I
Okay.
thought,
They don't
wow,
want any trouble.
So if you're 16 alone, you can.
yeah,
As long as you're not childbearing.
as long as you're not childbearing or you are over 55.
Yeah.
Then you can marry your cousin. So if you have something for your cousin, wait till you're over. We're safe. We can marry our cousins here. California, you can marry them anytime.
I don't think I have a cousin I want to marry.
No, me neither.
I know.
No,
I don't think so.
Notice how strong the condemnation is. It's a depravity. It's not just a small thing, it's depravity. The Hebrew word means morally apprehensive. Don't do it. It's detestable. And this is just marrying or sleeping with a relative. It talks about taking two sisters as wives. Who did that?
That.
And how did that work out for him?
Not at all.
Yeah, we're thinking Jacob with Rachel and Leah. And how much jealousy was there?
But that wasn't his decision. That decision was made
It
for
was
him.
more or less his
he
decision.
could have
He
just,
could've just said,
stopped
okay,
after
I'm-
the first.
Yeah, I'm married to Leah, that's it. I
He ended
love
up with
Rachel, but I'm
4.
married to Leah and I need to. So he's not completely innocent. I mean, he was cheated. But again, that was much earlier on.
Well, wasn't one of his sons slept with one of his concubines too?
Oh, yes.
So,
Oh,
so
yeah.
they're breaking the law there as well.
Oh, yeah.
And some of Jacob's sons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was all sorts of it before. Now it is laid down in law. Now they are just not to do that. It still happened, but they're not to do that. Okay, so now we're getting to some individual laws. These were laws about mass, relatives, things. Now they're going to be like one verse things. Mia, you get one verse. Verse 19.
Do not approach a woman to have sexual relations during the uncleanliness of her monthly period.
Okay, we already kind of covered this in chapter 20. But see what the punishment is here. Well, we didn't see what the... we're going to see that the punishment here is being cut off from the people. Really strict. In chapter 15, where we covered it before, it was ritual uncleanness. So, what's up with that? Why is it ritual uncleanness back there, and up here now it's going to be you're cut off?
Well, it doesn't say anything about that being your wife. It just says if
Yeah.
you approach a woman. So that's
Yeah.
different.
If
Yeah.
anybody's.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
And it's an attitude thing too. Even if you're married, if it was accidental, like neither of you knew, and it like, oh my gosh, that was different than if you intentionally went and laid with your wife during that time. Intentional sin, you got cut off from the people. So even though it doesn't mention the marriage bed here, it covers the marriage bed. And it covers any other thing. I mean, it's wrong to uncover her nakedness if she's not your wife anyway. But bad enough that you got cut off from the people. Okay, verse 20.
And you shall not lie sexually with your neighbor's wife, and so make yourself unclean with her.
That's adultery. A marriage covenant is between a man and a woman. Anything else was against God's design. This is one of those that is already covered under the 7th commandment. If they pay attention to the commandments, they already know this one. Notice no excuses like, oh, my husband doesn't understand me. He doesn't pay any attention to me. He's having an affair, so I should be able to have an affair. God led us to be with each other. No, none of that. That's not God saying any of that. Okay, verse 21.
You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord.
Okay, we're in this chapter about sexual sins, and here comes this verse. But it actually does fit in here. So, worship of the pagan idol Moloch was horrible. They would make statues out of metal, usually bronze. Huge statues. And with the arms out like this, like they're cradling something. And then they would heat the statue until it was red hot. Then they would put a living baby in the arms. Now they would beat drums and so that they couldn't hear the screams of the dying baby. Chapter 20, we're going to see God says anyone that worships Moloch, execute them. Get rid of them. That's why. Because Moloch was bad news. And it's a straightforward command with a really serious penalty, yet they still will, when they get into the promised land, they'll get into it. In fact, Solomon built a temple to Moloch. Probably because one of his wives was a Moloch worshiper. The wisest man in the world. Sometimes such an idiot. And when Israel splits centuries later, the northern tribes are going to worship Moloch. And it's listed as one of the reasons why God lets the Assyrians capture them. King Manasseh of Judah, of the southern kingdoms, he sacrificed his son to Moloch. Why is anyone doing this? They would do these sacrifices in the valley of Hinnom. King Josiah is the one that destroyed the statues that were in that valley and the temples. He converted that valley to a garbage dump for the city, and he kept it continually burning. They would continually burn their trash, and it looked like a lake of fire. The valley's name finally became Gehenna. So that's where, which is another name for hell. So, why is this in the middle of sexual sins? It's because Jewish parents would also offer their children to become temple prostitutes for Moloch. So there's where don't offer your children to become prostitutes. It's basically how this ties in sexually. Another aspect of the worship of Moloch, if you had a child a baby you needed to get rid of because you weren't married, that was an easy way to get rid of that baby. Yeah, it was horrible worship.
Now in this society the same.
Yeah, we
Moloch,
just do it in a cleaner way.
Yeah,
Yeah, the screams are inside. Okay, now verse 22. I want you to notice how long this verse is. Was that you or? Okay. Go ahead.
You.
Oh, me?
Sure.
Okay, I get the fun verse. You shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. Okay, so we've seen all these verses. Is this verse any longer than any other verse? It's an abomination. It's wrong. God says it's wrong. And it's obviously something that's happening in our society today. But God didn't waste a lot of time on it. He just said, don't do it. It's pretty clear. His intention is for marriage to be between a man and a woman, and anything else is against God's design. our society finds that offensive. And God doesn't say it's wrong. He says it's an abomination, a really strong condemnation. But again, we need to be careful not to hate people because of their sin. We don't need to approve of their sins. It's that hate the sin, love the sinner thing. God still wants them to come to him if they haven't already. And it's possible there are a lot of homosexuals that are saved because what sins do we have that we were saved? So it's possible. It's not our job to condemn anybody. We let God do that.
Well, you know, in our generation, people didn't flaunt it.
No.
They kept it in the closet.
Yes.
And they didn't, so they weren't, I don't know how to say it. They weren't letting children see what was going on, so the children thought that it was okay.
It's definitely more flagrant. Not that society then was. If you see things about how they treated homosexuals in England during that time, and that wasn't right either.
Today they still will kill them or whatever.
Or they'll go through hormone treatments.
Yeah.
Just try to medically get out of them.
Yeah.
So, you know, in some countries it's still a sin.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you wouldn't want to be in Iraq or Iran.
right.
So the issue isn't love. It doesn't say, you know, I have discussions with my granddaughter, and she says, but doesn't God want to, how could it be wrong to love someone else? It's not wrong to love them.
That's right.
It's the sexual context of
That's
it.
that's where they don't understand that's the sin.
Yeah, God doesn't have a problem with love. But the bottom line, it is a sin, but everyone deserves the respect and compassion due to anybody else in sin.
We had a lady that was coming to church here one time, and she was from up north, Sacramento area, Salt Lake area. And she came 4 or 5 times, and then one time she asked me, she said, does this church approve homosexuality? And I said, no. And that was the last time I ever saw her. So
It is a divisive subject.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but we don't approve homosexuality,
Right.
but we approve people.
Right. Yeah.
But we can't also slide into accepting their sin. But we need to look at people through the eyes of Jesus.
Right.
Just Jesus.
That's what she didn't understand.
Yeah.
You know, that even though she could be accepted here, but not if she was practicing.
Yeah.
And still living with her person.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same thing with couples living together. It's the same. It seems like in our society, it's easier for us to accept that. That's still a sin.
Right.
It's still adultery. We need to accept the person, but not their sin and their action. So it's a touchy subject. But that's all God says about it here. Straightforward, don't do it. So we'll go on to the next fun one. Verse 23.
My
No.
Nor shall you mate with any animal to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate it with. It is perversion.
We just think, and it goes, oh, perversion. Bestiality. It's hard to even imagine bestiality.
But it must have been going on for God to have
It did,
told them not to do it.
Yeah, huh? Yeah. And it is going on today. It was apparently done in Egypt, also done in Canaan. It's actually legal in some European countries.
I never heard that.
Yeah. I would imagine, what country is Amsterdam in?
Holland?
Holland. It's probably legal there. Because Amsterdam is,
The red district.
yeah. Yeah. People who worshipped the god Ugarit practiced bestiality. So a clear command. Don't do it. It's perverse. I mean, it's easy for us to go, ugh, but perverse. They kind of thought they would draw the animal's power from them. It's like, well, that's stupid, but we do things too. But
I mean, there was a study, I think in the 60s, where scientists were trying to create a hybrid between humans and certain animals.
Well, we had movies about, what was that? Someone's Island, Dr. Moreau's Island?
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah, where they did that. Yeah, don't do that. Although that was done in a
I
different
mean,
way.
Planet of the Apes, didn't the guy fall in love with one of the ape women?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But we don't have any animals that are that close. Okay. Next subject. Verses 24 through 30. This is getting into the why and the summary statement.
Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things. For by all these, the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean. And the land became unclean, so I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules, and do none of these abominations, either in the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who were before you did all of these abominations, so that the land became unclean. Lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. For everyone who does any of these abominations, the persons who do them shall be cut off from among their people. So keep my charge never to practice any of these abominable customs that were practiced before you, and never go make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. So yes, they were doing it.
It was happening in Eve. God doesn't want them to be like their neighbors. So this is another summary statement. Our culture doesn't seem to think anything's wrong with most of these things. Their measure is, does it make me happy? And not right and wrong. David Guzik calls these family killing sins. And if they kill the family, they kill the civilization. Sexual sin defiles us. A big part of the reason why Israel was taken out of the land centuries later is because of sexual sin and their perversions. God said, enough. God vomited them out. He says, I'm going to vomit you out, and he did. He vomited them out to the Assyrians and Babylonians. We need to be prepared. God's only going to take what's going on here for so long, and then we're going to get vomited. So the penalty for them on these sexual sins was to be cut off, exiled, leave. Again, sometimes some commentators say what it meant is execution. Others say it means you're kicked out of the camp. There's no waiting until evening and washing and being cleaned. Not for these. For them, this was an unforgivable sin to do any of this. Of course, we live on this side of the cross, and we can be forgiven those things, but not them. You did this and you were gone. This chapter started off with a statement, I am your God. It ends the same way. I'm God. I make the rules. You don't. Okay, whew. Got through chapter 18. Yeah. Chapter 19, whole different kind of chapter. So this chapter seems kind of like a hodgepodge of just things thrown together, but it kind of reemphasizes some important things. It's about how to live a holy life. And some of the things here don't apply to us, but the concept behind it does apply to us, that we are to be different from the world. So how do we tell which ones apply to us, which ones don't? Because there are some here that people try to apply to us today and they just don't make sense. So there was a commentator that said his Old Testament seminary teachers said, when interpreting the Old Testament, does the New Testament accept, reject, or revise the teaching of the Old Testament text? I guess I would add, does it even mention it? Mark Twain, I love this quote. He says, it isn't the portions of the Bible which I don't understand that bother me, it's the ones I do. Okay, we're still on the one verse at a time thing. So this is 2. You got that. 1 and 2.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I am the Lord your God. For I, the Lord your God, am holy.
So are you seeing a pattern? When God starts these things, he's reminding them, I'm the rule maker. You got to pay attention to these things. Here, because God is holy, they are to be holy too. Now, we can never be as holy as God, but we are to let his holiness come through us. Holiness is a separation. It's God is different than man, and so he is holy in the same way we are to be holy and be separated from the world. We're to be different. So for us to be holy is to be more like God and less like the world. Verse 3.
Each of you must respect your mother and your father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God.
Okay, we're going to see a lot of repeats of the commandments. This is a repeat of the 5th commandment. But notice something unusual about the word Sabbath?
It's plural.
It's plural. In the commandment, it says to keep my Sabbath. So what this is talking about, it is meaning keep every observance that in which Israel is to rest. So add on the Day of Atonement, which we already talked about. There are actually 8 different Sabbaths. 8, you've got the regular Sabbath and then these special days where it is a day of rest. So keep my Sabbaths, keep them all holy, not just the one day a week. So this is a combination one where it talks about honoring your mother and father. If generations are battling, society has problems. It's I remember growing up, was it Timothy Leary that said, don't trust anybody over 30? Now all of us that were under 30 or over 30, way over 30, so can we not trust ourselves anymore? I don't know.
How about if you're twice 30?
Yeah,
Look what happened to him.
In Proverbs, we're going to see a lot about respecting parents. Notice who comes first in that list.
A mother.
According to one commentary, that's partly because the mothers were responsible for raising the children. Another one says it's because of respect for the mother. something interesting about the Sabbaths. They're both jumbled together. That is the only commandment not repeated in the New Testament.
Really? Don't keep the Sabbath?
They do keep the Sabbaths, but we don't see a commandment to keep the Sabbaths in the New Testament.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
But they do, and we still keep our day of rest. Only it's not very restful, but we keep it today. But it wasn't commanded in the New Testament, and it's the only one of the 10 not recommanded. Yeah, I know we're all gonna have to really look, but yeah, if you find one, let me know. Okay, verse 4. Where did we leave off?
Was it me?
Oh.
Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am the Lord your God.
Now that's a repeat of the second commandment. Although the word for idols here is a different word than used back in the second commandment. This one means worthless, inadequate. It's meant to be as insulting as it sounds. You know, don't turn to these stupid things, God's saying. I'm God. It's only used one other time in the Pentateuch, in Moses' book, but not in the second commandment. This is one of those commandments the Israelites are going to have a lot of problems with. And notice it says gods of cast metal. Moloch especially was a god of cast metal, the one with the babies. So God already knew you're going to have problems with this guy. It seemed like after they came back from Babylon that they were kind of cured of this, but then they started a different kind of idolatry. They started idolizing the nation of Israel itself, the temple, their ceremonies, tradition. That's what Jesus runs into. They're idolizing things that started off as what God wanted to be good, and then they idolize the actions rather than the God that they're to point to.
Wasn't there also a god that they worshipped? There was like a bowl that they put the person in and then put over the fire, so it was like a giant oven.
Yeah, I'm sure there's. There's some kind of God.
I just can't remember what it was.
I can't remember what it is, but yes, there is one.
And I know we've seen that in movies too. What movie was that in? 300.
I've never
Yeah.
seen that one.
Or the sequel.
The second one, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you get 4 verses, 5 through 8.
When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord, you shall offer it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, or on the day after, and anything left over until the 3rd day shall be burned up with fire. If it is eaten at all on the 3rd day, it is tainted, it will not be accepted. And everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from his people.
Okay, so we've run into this before, but now we see the penalty for eating that sacrifice, any of that sacrifice on the 3rd day. It's like not just that you're going to get a tummy ache from eating food that's been out for 3 days, but you're cut off.
You're going to get food poisoning.
Yeah, that would be punishment enough, but no, you're cut off. God does not want a stale relationship. If you are eating something as an offering to God, he wants that to be fresh. Plus, he wants us to be healthy. When it says that in verse 8, it talks about it being profane. Profane is to treat something as if it wasn't sacred. That is to be sacred. So this offering was to be sacred, and by eating it on the 3rd day when you're told not to, you're making it not sacred anymore. And so you're cut off. Okay, verse 9 and 10 says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. So we're going to run into this in Ruth. This is important in the story of Ruth. When she's following the gleaners, they are leaving the edges of the field alone. And that's because of this. This was kind of a welfare system for their poor. They could gather everything at the corners to feed themselves. Notice it wasn't just given to them. They had to work for it. It kind of maintained their dignity. God cares for all his people.
We, at one time, when we were first married, there were places in California where we lived that they would gather their stuff out of their, the machines would come and everything. And then what was left, they would allow the neighbors to come in and clean up before it spoiled. There were several times that Bill and I went to different places and got vegetables and stuff like that they had allowed for the neighbors to have.
There are programs now where it's similar to like soup kitchens or food pantries, where, because stores and restaurants have very strict codes with how the fruits and vegetables have to be, and any kind of like small bruising that's not acceptable, it's still good. So these companies will go in and take the food that they're going to throw out anyways, and then give it to people who need it.
I think we need more of that today.
Yeah. One company we don't have here in St. George that does a really great job is Panera. When their bread is day old, they donate it to, they have different charities that come and get it and distribute it.
I wish Subway did more of that.
Yeah, I'm sure it would, with our homeless, all these homeless that we have, it's just...
Yeah. Now, this isn't the only way they care for the poor. In Deuteronomy, we're going to see that they did have a tithing system that they had a special tithe every 3 years, and the gate would give that to the poor. So they did other things to help the poor.
We sure should do more.
Yeah. In the right ways.
Exactly. Like I think about the where they put the old people where they're putting their older people, and the people are complaining the food is so bad, and that's why your older ones don't want to go into these places, because they're not,
The quality of life isn't.
it's not the same, and these places that have to throw away their stuff could be donating to these places.
A lot of that is because of federal regulations that they have to serve certain things. And it's just like school lunches.
It's
It has
how
to
much
be-
federal regulations are involved.
It has to
the
be
nutrition.
just certain things, and
not only that, you have to realize that you have over 100 elderly people who all have different taste buds, different tastes,
and
different
different
preferences,
and
Well, I know,
different
but
medical reasons
when
they
I
have.
medical reasons.
When I
Yes.
had my mom in, I had to have her in a care facility because I couldn't take care of her any longer. And I would go in and help her eat and things, and the food was just disgusting. And I have a friend who's taking the food into her it's really not her mother, but it's a close friend. She's going out and taking food into her because she cannot eat that food that's in there. It's just disgusting.
And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I would say there's different facilities are going to have. There's
Different
maybe
food.
something with
It depends
that
on how much
facility.
what facility you can afford to be in.
Yeah. Okay, on to more subjects. Verses 11 through 13.
You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another, and you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of your Lord. I am the Lord.
And 13. In verse 13 too.
And you shall not cheat your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of him who is hired shall not remain with you all night until morning.
Okay, so this may seem like a hodgepodge of things together, but they all are versions of stealing. Stealing, dealing falsely with someone, weighing things the wrong way. That was one way they would cheat people. Lying to one another, swearing by God's name falsely. You're kind of stealing God's honor there. Oppressing your neighbor. These verses establish the right to private property. We've talked about that before. God allows individuals to own things, and you're not allowed to take things from that don't belong to you. When it talks about swearing by God falsely, it's probably tied into the stealing thing in that it is more than likely talking about swearing that something is good to trade on God's name when it isn't good, or trying to deceive someone by using God's name. Like, I swear on my mother's grave. And your mother's not dead. So, the word here for neighbor, you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him, it actually means another. It doesn't mean the person living next door to you. So that kind of spreads out the audience. You don't cheat anybody. Okay, verse 14.
You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord.
Okay, this is a bullying verse. You can't bully people. Anyone that would think about taking advantage of someone with a disability, that's a special kind of evil. So we can see bullies are not a new thing. They've been around. Again, God wouldn't have written about it if it wasn't a problem. Because this chapter is about how to live a holy life. This means generosity and kindness are part of a holy life. And if you aren't kind and generous, you're not where God wants you to be. Verse 15 and 16.
You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. But in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord.
Okay, this is mainly court stuff. It's a command to judges. We're going to see lots of commands to judges, to courts, about being fair. Everyone was to be treated equally, rich, poor, the mighty, the weak, all treated alike. They were not to, some judges had a problem leaning so far to the weak that it was not just to the strong. So either way, it had to be just. Gossips, people that can't just mind their own business. This is one of those sins that's so easy to fall into, especially when it's disguised as a prayer request. And we just really want to tell everybody what's going on. Please pray about the situation. Did you know Marcia and Fred are, no, that's gossip. God says don't do that. When you're thinking about telling someone something, you should be thinking, am I talking to the right person? Do they need to know what's going on? And if not, don't say it. Hold it in. It can be tough. So when it says stand up against the life of your neighbor, so there's lots of thoughts on what that means. But since it's tied into a legal thing, it probably means if you know the truth, you have to stand up and say the truth. Don't just let it, you have to speak out. You can't just let things happen. You have to be a true witness. So I think we'll stop there. Anyone that's watching, I'm going to turn off the camera now and we're going to do prayer requests. But if you have any way we can pray for you, please add it in the comments and our group will add you to our prayer list. Thank you.